And I was here during that time. So I was at the height of the frenzy, if you wish. I'm not invalidating the question. At the same time, that's not enough reason to give up. You're not only here for the party when things are going well. If you really believe in the emes of this, even if sometimes you don't see how it's going to work out, you have to be in. Like, I remember thinking to myself, back in 1977, I'm talking now, Lamed Ches, I said, what happens if, God forbid, the Rebbe takes the Rebbe? Then the Rebbe said, ich habe getan alles, tut alles, was ihr kennt. The only thing I can say is that we didn't do everything we could.
Good morning, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you very, very much for joining us here.
My pleasure to be here.
My name is Levi Garari, and I work on the Alef. The Alef is weekly Moshiach lessons that we've been sending out to over 500 shluchim and chassidim around the world to use to teach about Moshiach in Torah-based, text-based, in fresh language, in relevant language, in the nice, articulate language for people of today's day. And that's really the point of our conversation today. Our point is similar to the Alef, to go through certain topics in Moshiach, some that are a little bit more complex, some that people have complicated feelings about, and to gain some clarity for ourselves and to learn the right words and the right layman's terms, how to give it over to the people that we learn it with and ourselves. So the first paper, the paper that we're discussing today, is The Last Stand. It's the 10th edition, 10th paper of the Alef. And we put it out in honor of Gimmel Tammuz. So the team, when we were working on it, we were thinking which direction to go. And of course, the first thing that came to mind was to speak about the mission. As in, Mashiach as a concept has been existent for forever, right? From the beginning of creation. But to talk about the situation in which we find ourselves today, especially approaching Gimmel Tammuz, not much tonight, and at a number like where we're holding now, we felt it was important to talk about the specific and unique mission that we as Chassidim and that we're supposed to spread to the world in connection. That's why we chose to speak about The Last Stand, the Dar Achron of golus, and Dar Rishon Shel Gula. Mashiach, we've been getting a lot of beautiful feedback. People really like Mashiach. People like hearing about a brighter vision for tomorrow and all that. But this is the first time we're trying to argue that it's now, that we are the generation. And the worry that we have, we went ahead with it, but the thing that we feel like we would like to have better understanding of for ourselves and to share with others is, how can we say that we are this generation? I feel like if I went to a person on the street and said, not only Mashiach is coming eventually, but it's coming now, and you are the guy, you're in your hands, he would think I'm crazy. And he would think I'm a Messianic in the negative sense of it. I don't know, millenarianism. I don't even know what terms they would use, but they would think I'm crazy. So my question to you is, how do we bring this message in a way that people can really understand?
So let me begin with this. I think many questions can be answered, question, answer, but many need to be answered by going back to the beginning. What is Mashiach in the first place? I think that's where the most confusion exists. For some, Mashiach is some type of supernatural utopia, ice cream will grow on trees, things that are just not fantasy, basically. For others, Mashiach is, bottom line, there's a lot of stereotypes around it. And I think once we understand what it is, it becomes a lot easier to answer the question, why now? Especially now, more than ever. So the best way that I explain it, and I'm going to use language which really is universal, so everybody can relate to without using Hebrew words, even though anyone that's familiar will understand which words I'm referring to, is to understand what is life, what is the purpose of life. That's really the question. Because Mashiach is about the fulfillment and realization of God's plan for this world. So what is that plan? So we all know we live in a material world. We have bodies, we have physical needs, we need to eat, to sleep, to drink, to have relationships, to deal with health issues, to make a parnasa, a livelihood, take care of our families, work. The list goes on. Everybody knows that. They don't need to read any books about that. But we're also told that we need to live a life of purpose, a life of meaning, like to direct all those material activities towards something deeper. Now, a skeptic could question that as well, to be very honest, and say, who says? I'm very perfectly happy. I'm making money. I'm enjoying life. And what do you want from me? But I don't want to address that because that's a different question. Let's assume, for this discussion at least, that we can all agree that we all need something more than just survival. We need what was called in English transcendence, something deeper. Some people pursue it through travel, some people through love, some people through faith. But we need something more than just eating and sleeping. And that is, I'll just use the word, something spiritual, something transcendent. So Maimonides, the ultimate authority, especially halachic, legal authority in Judaism, when he explains Mashiach, he says one line, that the business of the world will be nothing but knowing God. Which means today, the business of the world, as we know, Wall Street, the marketplace, all the things I mentioned, survival, material existence. So what does it mean to know God? So we have an expression, which means you're not just eating a meal, you're eating a meal with an intention to get stronger so you can help another person. You can be a kinder person, a gentler person. You make money in order to give charity. In other words, everything is about what I would call spiritualizing the material world. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, in chapter 36 and 37, explains, since the whole idea of every mitzvah is to bring godliness into this world, to bring a level of higher consciousness, if you wish, so every mitzvah is really a piece of Mashiach, because Mashiach is the sum total of all the building blocks of good deeds that people have done and sacrificed themselves from the beginning of time. In other words, and this is critical, in Jewish thought, Mashiach and Geula are part of a process, not just an event. At the end of history, something's going to happen. It's a process that began with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and has gone on from history in an unbroken chain. Every good deed, every mitzvah, every sacrifice, every life given for something good releases a spiritual energy in the world that somewhat refines the world. And that process accumulates. It can't go backwards. It can only accumulate. It can only get better. So the world gets more and more refined. And at some point, what we would call it erupts into the sum total that we would call Moshiach and Geula. So Moshiach and Geula, if you think of it, is really the belief that every good deed that each of us does lives on forever. And our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents did not act in vain when they gave their lives to be good people and to do mitzvahs. And I'm speaking very in general terms, obviously. So Mashiach is the accumulation. Now, how do we know when that eruption takes place? So there, either you have to have sensitive eyes or you have a leader. So we have the Rebbe, and I'm speaking now, even if you're not a chassid of the Rebbe per se, but he's a spiritual visionary. He's a person who's in touch with takes the pulse of our times and identifies and says, if you open your eyes, I'm using the Rebbe's words now, and you connect the dots, you will see that we have come to a point where all this has accumulated. And this does not require faith. Let's just take a few examples and really drive the point home. Most of us take our blessings for granted. You and I are sitting here right now, and Jews around the world, even though we have a war and we have anti-Semites, I'm not saying the world is perfect, but we've never had it as good. You and I'm not afraid of someone outside right now waiting to arrest us or round us up like 80 years ago. Our great-grandparents would see this as Messianic times from a point of religious freedom. Send your children to any school that you'd like to send them to. You could practice your Yiddishkeit freely. This didn't happen by accident. This is a result of thousands of years of hard work that refined the world, that material world, which was once a pagan world that opposed and resisted anything that was godly and went to war against it and went to war against Jews, now is a free world in most instances. Technology. The Zohar says clearly that in the year 1840, in the Hebrew year Tafresh, but the English year is 1840, which was considered the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there'll be an explosion of knowledge, both above and below. And look what happened. Since 1840 till today, and it's only accelerating, a tremendous amount of technology. So from a mystical point of view, that's not seen as an accident, that some creators invented and happened to discover subatomic energy. That's all part of a world that is becoming more and more receptive to spiritual energy. And as a result, we today can transcend time and space through broadcasting and a podcast like this and all the other things. political freedoms. I mean, the list goes on that when you look at the world today, even, I'll just quote, we'll call a Jew, but he calls himself an atheist, Steven Pinker. He has a whole book where he explains how the world is infinitely better today than it ever was. He explains it in the case of enlightenment and human beings have become more mature and more refined. But he basically shows that the decline of violence, the decline of war, the decline of discrimination is, you'd be amazed to see the trajectory, how it's going lower and lower. So all this, the Rebbe looks at it with the eyes of a Rebbe and the eyes of a Jew, the eyes of Torah, is all part of a signs that clearly that all those good deeds that I was talking about have come to a climax, and we're about to finish the finish line. Now, just for the record, every skeptic could say, whenever Mashiach is going to come, you could say, why now? Maybe tomorrow. But the bottom line is, if you're a firm believer that God's plan will be realized, there will be a time. And the Rebbe says it, and I just should say for the record, the Rebbe is not the only one. People before the Rebbe and other Gedalim that are not even Chabad also point out that you see many of the signs. So I think if you use your rational mind and scientific mind, and you understand what Mashiach really is, you could see that there's so many things happening now. Some people call AI Messianic. And I can go on and on, but that's my overall summary.
Thank you. So I have two questions on what you were saying. The first is, you mentioned that anyone who's using their rational mind, and that is a good point, because a lot of times the way we react to ideas and notions is not necessarily from a rational perspective. It's more from, we're so used to the way we see things that we're not really willing to hear and like listen just to see if it makes sense rationally. We just, if it makes sense to the way we see things, good. If not, we push it away. So my question is, if we had someone sitting down in a room and we were able to give them a longer explanation as you just did, then good. My question is, could be it's not shaykh, could be it's not possible. The question is there an easier, not an easier, but is there like a quicker way to jolt somebody out of their regular perspective and get them to, and I should say them, get ourselves, because we're really stuck in the same thing, to accept the fact that Mashiach's coming soon is not a crazy thing to think about.
The elevator pitch, basically.
Yes.
How do you okay. The truth is, as you know, anything built overnight dies overnight. I think the quicker the inspiration, the quicker it could dissipate. Yeah, can I point out people in their personal lives have a miracle that happens, and they say, oh, wow, this must be... It's just very difficult, I think, in very brief terms. I would just say the following, that if you're an honest person, look at your life, compare it to the life of your great-grandparents. You tell me, is there a difference? And is that an accident, or is it part of a process? I'm not even trying to force anyone to come to a conclusion. You make the decision. Some people may say it's an accident. It just happens to be that we have a better life. Or if you think about it, you see there is a trajectory. There's a process. I think that's why I quoted Steven Pinker. You cannot deny that the world is more refined in so many ways. I'll just use one example. Again, short example. What I'm saying is a bunch of short pieces, okay? I remember a few years ago in Haiti, there was an earthquake. And all the countries of the world were competing, not to conquer the country, but to help with humanitarian aid. And I was thinking about it. I said, in history, if when a country suffered an earthquake or a volcano, you know what happened? All the neighbors came to rape and pillage that country and steal all its resources. And here, countries around the world with no self-interest are coming to send helicopters and planes and medical supplies and food. So there is a gravitation toward humanitarianism, and you have to wonder why. It's charity. You know how many billions of dollars the United States gives out in charity? Not getting now whether you agree with all the places they give charity to. Why would I pay my hard-earned tax dollars? Why should I be paying to some country in Africa that has a water shortage or something like that? There is a certain element of the world has come to be more charitable, more kind. The Rebbe's words, Malchus Shel Chesed. It didn't exist. 250 years ago, when the United States became a country, there was no such thing as freedom. There was no freedom. You were under the ruling of a king, a monarch, the church, some tyrant. Maybe he was kind, maybe he wasn't kind. So these are, just take any one of these examples. And I would just, and you find it's undoubtable that there is a tremendous shift in the world.
So that argument that you're saying now is one that I always used to listen to, and I always appreciated, and it always made a lot of sense to me. But starting about 2-3 years ago, I remember I was speaking to somebody and I was saying, there's no more wars in the world. Look, the Soviet Union, the Rebbe says it's going to fall, and it fell, and it's wonderful. But unfortunately, starting with the war in Russia and Ukraine, that was already the first, it tipped over the domino thing. And then moving on to what happened in Eretz Yisrael this last year. And I'm also going to mention America just because, that's kufa that we're busy with these days. Also, the political scene, everyone's going to the extremes, extreme right, extreme left, anti-Semitism, and whatever it is. So I know that, it's not everything's going to look utopian until Geula comes, but just a little more, it is a question that bothers people, I think.
That's a great question, and I'll respond to it very directly. Firstly, keep in mind, whenever you're involved in a particular situation, it's hard to see the bigger picture. And I was just coming from a shiva call, unfortunately, a few days ago, where a mother lost a child. So I'm not going to sit there with the mother and say, hey, you should know we're closer to Mashiach than ever because there's world peace and then there's technology and there's AI. For right now, this mother is grieving her child. For her, Mashiach is as far as possible. She wants her child back. So I think we have to keep in mind that what I was describing and with what is the bigger picture. The bigger picture, there's no question. The Jewish people are living in a time unprecedented. We've never had such freedom. That's not to minimize what happened on October 7th and Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah and those atrocities, which I'll address in a moment. So we have to look at the bigger pictures, number one. Being that Mashiach is not here yet, the story is not over. So that's number one. Number two, the Rebbe actually in Purim, Tavshin Mem Zayin, the last Sikha, the last talk he gave in that Farbrengen, we talked. It was a Farbrengen, very historic Farbrengen about that Mashiach is mamish coming and the immediacy. So he said, but we see in the world, exactly your question, we see areas where there's moral decline, decadence, things that are, like in some ways, some people think worse than ever. And the Rebbe's answer was the concept, what it says in the book of Daniel, Yizbaru v'yislabna advarim, that one of the signs of Mashiach, especially the end of days, is where I'll use my own language, the toxins start coming out. It's like, when you're about to finish something, the last fumes begin to emerge. So is it better that it should be concealed or better we should see it? So when you see it, it can be very painful. But nevertheless, the awareness of it is actually a positive, not the experience itself. So the only way to answer the question of the Ukraine and the Gaza war and the anti-Semitic attacks, and for that matter, any tragedy, is these are the last gasps of golus, if you wish. So to speak, the tension between matter and spirit, what I was talking about earlier, is like not finished yet. So there's still that. We still are psychologically trapped because even if Mashiach and Gula are literally right here, we still think like we thought 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And therefore, these things are not a contradiction. And the final thing I'll say, I'll just quote the Rebbe here. Often when the Rebbe was asked, the Rebbe himself asked, what about this tragedy? I remember when Mrs. Lapine was killed in Crown Heights. This was Tavshin Nun Beis, weeks before Chavzai Nother, when the Rebbe was mamish talking about Geula is about to come, and the Rebbe himself was crying. Why did this happen? And you could see the Rebbe's answer was Chabtaka Kasha. Not everything is clear and understood. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have it all figured out and I can explain to you every tragedy. No, I don't. When you see something that seems like a setback, like no one expected the war in October 7th. Why should Jews have to die and people held hostage? So ultimately, I don't have an answer to that. But it doesn't change the story that God's plan will be realized. And it didn't necessarily mean that the clock was turned back. It means that we have some blips in the screen, as they say, some kinks that need to be, and we cry for it and we don't minimize it, but we march forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to summarize, to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying, the argument, so to speak, that we're saying is that Mashiach is something which is a process, meaning to say, and we're coming after 2,000 years of golus and everything that came before then, so we're moving toward, there has to be an end, right? Not an end, there has to be a crossover at some point, and the signs seem to be showing that it's now. And if there's anything that's in the way of that, that's just...
Well, it's either a question that we don't understand, why we still need to go through another painful experience, But it doesn't take away from the bigger picture and the narrative as it unfolds. I mean, I'll be very honest. I deal with many people who unfortunately have gone through trauma, tragedy, suffering. What I always see, those that grow through it and become stronger, it's not because they have less pain. It's because they see the bigger picture. They ultimately see that I have to do something with this and build something. So I think that's individually, same thing collectively. But the Jews always knew, and we went through the Holocaust. I mean, you want to ask questions. You tell me about the Holocaust. 6 million hidden. I'm not saying numbers matter. Every loss is a loss. But the end of the day was we don't really know. But what we did was, as the Rebbe puts it, we don't know why it happened, especially after we were promised that the Gula is about to come. But we ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? And look what Yidden did. They built. They built families. They built a country. They built communities. And so our answer is ultimately that we will not give up no matter what. The more we suffer, the more we grow. So we don't always have answers to why these things happen. But we don't change our faith that the marathon continues and we will come to the finish line. And that is, I think, extremely important to emphasize. It's not like the Jews that keep marching and believing Gula are naive and denying what happened. It's despite what happened, they continue animamin, even though he may be delayed. Yeah.
It's interesting. On a certain different paper that we're working on a little later on, we speak about Yitzhak Sefer Gadol. So there's the Sichas from the Rebbe after the 6-day war. There's one Sicha that I was reading. It's unbelievable. Like I was actually telling it to somebody. He was like, no, the Rebbe, it doesn't make any sense to say that. And I'm like, I looked in the Sicha again, and the Rebbe actually says it. The Rebbe says, there's 2 shofars that are supposed to happen. There's the one in Zechariah, Vayalekim b'Sefer Yitka, I think, and then another one in Yishai, Yitak b'Sefer Gadol. So in the first one, the Rebbe says is the First and Second World War.
So the Sefer Maimorim Yiddish from the Frierdiker Rebbe, right?
I didn't know it's there.
Yeah,
too.
he brings it from there.
Yeah. So that's the traditionalist. That's the world is going through a crazy time. And then after the 6-day war, that's the tshuva that's beginning. But from there, I'm actually going to ask you a question. That as we're approaching Gimmel Tammuz, as we mentioned, the idea that it's very important in order for us to give this over to other people, we have to make sense to us as well.
Right.
And I mean, I was born after Gimmel Tammuz. My friends are all the same. We're all moving on shlichus, raising families, going into the Anash community. And the question that comes up at this point, 30 years after Gimmel Tammuz, is that we're saying that we're the last generation of golus, first of Gula. The Sichas are saying, Dar Achan Shel Golus, Dar Rishon Shel Gula. The question is, again, like, how long can you make that argument last for? And I was going through it before. The Rebbe bases the tkufa that we're in on the Frierdiker Rebbe's La'alter L'Tshuva, La'alter L'Gula, which is Tafshin Gimel, 1943. That's over 80 years ago. The Shefer Gadol of Eretz Tshuva, the world is changing over, we're all moving. The first one is the World Wars, and the second one is 6-day war, also over 50 years ago. And then even in Alef Nebeis, the excitement and the Tkufa Achrayna that I was speaking about, that's over 30 years ago. So I'd love to believe, and I try, and this is what we all try, every February, and we're sitting trying to believe that we are this generation, but it's hard to internalize that. So if you can help us with some clarity here.
Let me be a little personal about it. I'm by nature a skeptical guy. So I have these questions myself, of course. And I was here during that time. So I was at the height of the frenzy, if you wish, and the excitement and the immediacy and the urgency. And it was like, the Rebbe said, Moshiach Office, and Essen Sudis Levyosin, you have all the immediacy. It was like now. And then, of course, I saw everything that's happened. And then Gimmel Tammuz, and now 30 years, and it's extremely sad to see on one hand, because it was not seemed to be meant that way. That was not the script. It wasn't like we were. Even now, you look back, it's like the Rebbe's merames that's not going to happen right now. There's no such remes. It was like completely unprepared, and every year that passed is still a shock. And like someone asked me, you want to be really blunt? Someone said to me, who says it can't be another 30 years? No one thought it could be 30 years. Now, So I have these questions myself as a skeptic. But I'll share my own personal response, and then I'll try to share maybe a more, I guess, haskaladika response, if you wish, more intellectual response. But I'm talking about a more emotional response. So I was 21 years old, Tov Shelamet Ches, when the Rebbe Shmini Atzeres had a heart attack, as we know, middle of Moshiach Office and the whole drama of that, and it was bad. It was a killer heart attack. Ultimately, that night we know, and thank God the Rebbe not just survived; he came out stronger than ever, and it was not a surprise. We all believed that's what would happen, and it did. So obviously, when it came to the Rebbe's stroke, everyone felt the same way. But let me go back there. But chatos ani masker, as a skeptic, I remember thinking to myself, back in 1977, I'm talking now, Lamed Ches, I said, what happens if, God forbid, the Eibishter takes the Rebbe? And this was far bought, you couldn't speak about this. You couldn't even think about it officially, because this was like, the worst. What do you mean, the Rebbe's, immortality? There was no such thing as an end. The Rebbe is going to be here forever, is going to bring Moshiach, and we'll have a Chaim Yitzchim and so on. But to myself, I was thinking this. And I was in that age, 21, I was in 770. It was my heyday. But at the same time, I had these thoughts. I couldn't deny that I had these thoughts. And then, I don't remember how, but I was reading the story with Shmuel Munkes. Today we have more details. A famous story where the Alter Rebbe asked him whether he should cooperate and allow himself to be arrested. Yitzhak Kislev story. And Shmuel Munkes said to the Alter Rebbe, Mamanavshach, Ebe seid a Rebbe, but they're going to chatten. If you're a Rebbe, nothing will happen to you. What are you afraid of? And if you're not a Rebbe, you deserve, today we know what he said. He said, you deserve a bullet to your head. This is a chassid speaking to Rebbe, because you took away the pleasure of Elam Haza, of this world, from so many chassidim. And I remember that story struck me it was like amazing to me. It blew me away, because I said to myself, you know what? It's time to grow up. The Rebbe's a Rebbe. He had a heart attack. You don't know, God's mysteries. You're not only here for the party when things are going well. If you really believe in the emes of this, even if sometimes you don't see how it's going to work out, you have to be in. Like, you're in this army, or you're not in the army. You're not in the army only when things are pleasant. Make a decision. I said to myself, and I made my decision. So when Gimmel Tammuz came, it didn't affect me quite. It emotionally affected me, like all of us. It was terrible. But I didn't affect my emunah in any way, because I went through my Gimmel Tammuz moment in Lamed Ches, if you know what I'm saying. So my point is, on a personal level, what's our option here? Let's be blunt. Our option is, 30 years have passed. I'm not in anymore. This didn't work out. I'm moving on. Or maybe the Rebbe, God forbid, made a mistake. Or whatever it is, I don't see that as an option. If the Rebbe and Chassidus and Torah is emes, and goes back to the Alter Rebbe and to the Baal Shem Tov and to Moshe Rabbeinu for that matter, we don't understand maybe why it took 30 years. What happened? Why didn't it work out? Why didn't what the Rebbe said happen? Tov Shin Nun Beis, Nun Alef, Nun Nun. I don't have an answer for that question. The Rebbe himself said a number of times, why Mashiach didn't come yet. There was a time where the Rebbe would say, why Mashiach didn't come, maybe we didn't finish something. But then the Rebbe started saying, because based the Berudim are finished, everything is done. So the Rebbe had a question. I definitely don't have to have an answer. But then the question is, do you get paralyzed and say, okay, since I don't have an answer, I quit? Or to me, that's not an option. And I think any chassid that you see all the shluchim, no one's quit. So to me, that's a sign that people will move on no matter what happens. So that's my emotional response. In other words, I don't need an answer. It's emes or not emes. Now, if it's not emes, I remember I said to myself back in Lamed Ches, so get out now. What, do you have to wait for something to happen? If you don't think it's emes, again. And that was what I took away from the Shmuel Munkes story. That's on that level. On intellectual level, look, it comes down to believing that the Eibishter created the world. Mashiach is going to come. The Rebbe told us that Mashiach will come in this generation, Deir HaShvi. He said it in the first Maimer, Bas Lagani. He didn't just say it in Tov Shin Nun Alef. He said it already in Bas Lagani, Tov Shin Yud Alef. And that this is the Deir HaShvi, the last generation of golus. You quoted it before, first generation of Geula. In the early Nuns, the Rebbe said, this is it. We're now No one expected, but then the Rebbe said, "Ich habe getan alles, tut alles, was ihr kennt." So the only thing I can say is that we didn't do everything we could. That's the only, if you want, excuse. I don't see it as an excuse because. So the only question I have to ask myself, Gimmel Tammuz, is: am I doing everything I can? Everything else is up to God's mysteries. I will not know why. Maybe one day we'll be able to figure out why it took so long. The only thing we could ask is, what are we going to do about it? Tut was and that's my only ultimate response. I'm being very honest and blunt about it. I don't see anything else that can be said. But, I'm sure people can come up with all kinds of cute answers, and they'll give a whole gematria on Shleishim and say Shleishim is the remez that Moshiach comes in the Shleishim from Gimmel Tammuz. Fine, that may work for them. Doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
My point is, I'm not invalidating the question, but at the same time, that's not enough reason to give up. On the contrary, I feel responsible in a way because the Rebbe gave us this job. He gave us marching orders. So for me, any giving up now is basically like not accepting the orders that you receive. That is serious,
Yeah, I was this Shabbos. I was speaking to a few friends, and we were going through this discussion of what hiskashrus means to people born after Gimmel Tammuz. So of course, there are those that go down the Zechronis path. That's the one way to go, to just try living with what happened. That doesn't work for everybody. I would say it doesn't work for a lot of people. And then you have those who the Rebbe's Torah, the Rebbe's Heiros. Those are all, and that's also valid. But on that level, I'm like, I can also learn the Rambam's Torah. Like, I understand that it's different because it's for our generation. But the one thing that was based on, similar to what you're saying over here was mission. Mission, the Rebbe's mission is one thing that exists in our time more. But, and you mentioned Total Vaster Kent, which is, of course, something that we've been trying to do, I hope, for the last 30 years. The shaila is, if it could be you don't have an answer, but where do you think we should go with it?
Well, I want to say something before I answer that. I would add to the conversation you were mentioning, it was kashrus. The Rebbe's emes, I think, is a big one. You see, let's be very honest. If you ask most Lubavitchers, why are you makusha to the Rebbe altogether? Why do you do what you do? Is it because you made a choice or because you grew up with it? Mitzvah sanashim elamada. You grew up with it. You have no reason not to do it. So you go on, continue what your parents did, what your friends do, what you went to yeshiva to. Did you actually make a decision that this is emes lamite for you, or are you just going through the motions? Many people don't like to talk about this because if you're really honest, some people say, I'm not sure. I can't answer that question. I don't know. It's not like, and that I learn other derachim that I decided this is I grew up with. I'm a Lubavitcher. I'm the Rebbe's a chassid. And some people are even offended by such a question. What do you mean? Of course, the Rebbe's emes lamite. But honestly, I think it's important to make that into a pnimius. It's a question: how do you know? How do you so committed to the Rebbe's emes? That to me is. Maybe it's another way of putting what you said about shlichus, the idea of a mission, that you're on a mission. But is that the Rebbe's mission is an emes mission? That what the Rebbe said, Der Ashvi, is not open for discussion. It is a fact. Are you I can assure you that if you thought it was an absolute fact, just like the fact that you're breathing right now, then that doesn't matter what questions you have. We'll have a lot of questions, but you cannot give up. It's a fact that I love my children. Even if they don't behave the way I like them to behave, I'll always love them. That type of emes. I think that's what we have to come to terms with, my view on the matter. As far as your the question that you just asked, what was the question? Remind me.
What is?
What
do we do?
To me, look, the Rebbe could have easily spelled out a bunch of things to do. Now he did in other sichos, acts of goodness and kindness to CNN or Lilmed in Yonigul Mashiach, etc. But the fact in that sicha, he just said, he left it to us. He actually says at the end of the sicha, Chav Ches Nissen, which really is a very interesting expression. It means to consult and strategize what to do. That tells me that there are so many things that can be done and that people have to really fit and see what works for them. I'll speak from my tchum. Being that Yefutzimai Nesecha Chutza is what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, and that never changed. That has been the constant theme. And that's the work I'm involved in. and I try my best. To me, it's very clear what I have not done yet. I or others have not. We've not reached a critical mass. We've reached people, maybe millions, but not billions. Now, I'm not saying it's a numbers game, because Maisa Echad, one Maisa can tip the scales. And you save one Jew, it's saving a universe. You save one person, it's saving a universe. But as far as but you can't rely on that. You have to do. So to me, I look around and I say to myself, okay, I wrote a book, Torah Meaningful Life. I do a lot of videos, and I've spoken to many, many people of all walks of life. God bless me that I have the ability to reach people that are, let's call it, outside of the realm of traditional Judaism, if you wish, or the language of Torah. But by no means is it close to. So I say to myself, I look at the big companies out there, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all these. And I say, we're not even close to names like that. Moshiach and Geula and Chassidus has to be name recognition like those. To me, then I could say to the Rebbe, we did something. We are up there with the biggest. The whole world knows the word Chassidus, Rebbe, Moshiach, and Geula. So I don't need a lot of meditation to contemplate on what more can be done in my line of work. Now, I know I say this to shluchim sometimes. They say, "What? Are you kidding me? We're never going to reach that level." I said, "I believe in the product. I think we can." And that's Mala Oris Deis Hashem Kamam Lecho. Does it mean we have to reach that level? No. Maybe the Eber still see one more effort, and to Rachmanus Amen, the Geula will come. But from our point of view, we cannot stop. We have to keep going. So that, to me, is the main focus I put on, and I think is probably, in a way, the easiest, because technology allows you to do it today. Without technology, you could sit here and say to me, you're going to reach billions of people. Exactly how? You know how much money you need for that? But today, I think no one's going to ask that question, because we know one email can reach 8 billion people. One social media post, one podcast.
Yeah. Rabbi Jacobson, that was actually a great layup for me to plug the Alef again.
Go for it.
I had the same question. Again, I didn't do as much. I'm coming from a different perspective. But the one thing that I was thinking about was that in Yonigul Mashiach, for the crowd, to bring it to Chabad houses, to the world, is a place where we can up our game. We as Lubavitch. So everyone has to do what they can. So what we tried doing over here was to create a, English, nice, concept-based, text-based, in a way that you get away from certain issues or fears about Mashiach, but you still give over the Teichen the way it is. Another mile I was just thinking about, everyone's thinking about different achanas for Gimmel Tammuz, this, that. Everyone's saying, come join my mosid. Join what we're doing. So I also feel that way on some level. I'm saying, come do what we're doing. But the point is, we're actually trying to give you something to do with somebody else. As they're not saying, come listen to my podcast or come listen to my shir. Every shliach can become a mashpiach. I think it's Karach Non Alef. The Rebbe says that every chas has to be a magid shir. Everyone has to give over. So this is, Baruch Hashem, something that we hope is something that can help us in this goal of bringing Mashiach to the world, Kol Echad V'Echad, in what they can do. And thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, so much for coming. Thank you for gracing us with your wisdom and with your...
Thank you. And continue with your great work. And exactly that. Tefeach hamnas latfiach. The whole point of this is lighting one flame, lighting another, because everybody has their sphere of influence. And like Chassidus says from the Medrash, Madlik Ner Mener, the first Ner does not get diminished. So we all have that, exactly. So empowering shluchim, empowering people, everybody, because it's also the people that shluchim reach, have to reach their sphere of influence. There's only what they call 5 degrees of separation between people. Yeah. So if everybody just reaches 5 people, exponentially, you can conquer the whole world.
All right, Yeshkoyach.
Thank you
very much.